Witajcie tutaj w Bozi, a dzisiaj jesteśmy w grze The Stanley Parable. Czekajcie, wiecie co? Dam sobie trochę cicha. Te dźwięki. W ogóle nagrywa się na pewno? Wszystko się ładnie nagrywa, dobrze. No to rozpocznij grę, a jeszcze tylko powiem to tutaj osiągnięcia, to włączam osiągnięcie, tam to osiągnięcie w skali i widać to na mnie, bo wyszedłem i tutaj. Nie, no dobrze, ale tak ogólnie to w to jeszcze nie grałem, aczkolwiek znam już tę grę, bo oglądam ją, po prostu już ją oglądałem na YouTubie, no niestety. Aczkolwiek oglądałem ją dawno i niezbyt dobrze to pamiętam.
This is the story of a man named Stanley.
Jak chcecie, to sami sobie czytajcie, bo nie
Stanley worked for a company in a big building where he was employee number 427. Employee number 427's job was simple. He sat at his desk in room 427 and he pushed buttons on a keyboard. Orders came to him through a monitor on his desk, telling him what buttons to push, how long to push them, and in what order. This is what employee 427 did every day of every month of every year. And although others might have considered it soul-rending, Stanley relished every moment that the orders came in, as though he had been made exactly for this job. And Stanley was happy. And then one day, something very peculiar happened. Something that would forever change Stanley. Something he would never quite forget. He had been at his desk for nearly an hour when he realized that not one single order had arrived on the monitor for him to follow. No one had showed up to give him instructions, call a meeting, or even say hi. Never in all his years at the company had this happened, this complete isolation. Something was very clearly wrong. Shocked, frozen solid, Stanley found himself unable to move for the longest time. But as he came to his wits and regained his senses, he got up from his desk and stepped out of his office.
No dobra. No to wam powiem, że tutaj chodzi o coś takiego, że po prostu to ma bardzo wiele zakończeń. I na przykład w innym dni to możemy słuchać się głosu. No i myślę, że to
All of his co-workers were
tylko
gone.
współpracownicy
What could
nie
it
wiem,
mean?
co to mogło znaczyć.
Stanley decided to go to the meeting room.
To pójść do
Perhaps he
sali
had simply
konferencyjnej,
missed a
może
memo.
po prostu nie wiem, co tam pisało. Po prostu będę robić to, co mówi ten głos, bo wiecie. Po prostu to jest najłatwiejsze zakończenie. Myślę, że
When Stanley came to a set of two open doors, he
wybrał
entered the
te po
door on
lewej,
his
to
left.
jest lewa, co nie? Tak, to jest lewa. No więc idziemy.
Yet there was not a single
Tutaj
person
nie
here
dostał ani
either.
jednej osoby.
Feeling a wave of disbelief, Stanley decided to go up to his boss's office, hoping he might find an answer there.
Poczekajcie, bo tutaj chyba dało się wejść. Tak, ale dobra, nie będę tam chodzić, to inny tylko.
Coming to a staircase, Stanley walked upstairs to his boss's office.
Dobra, wiem, już mi to spokojnie głosi. To jest tutaj.
Stepping into his manager's
Tam
office,
biura
Stanley
kierownika
was once again
ponownie
stunned to discover
brak
not an
jakichkolwiek
indication of any
porad.
human life. Shocked, unraveled, Stanley wondered in disbelief who orchestrated this, what dark secret was being held from him. What he could not have known was that the keypad behind the boss's desk guarded the terrible truth that his boss had been keeping from him. And so the boss had assigned it an extra secret PIN number, 2845. But of course, Stanley couldn't possibly have known this.
Tutaj gdzieś? Jakiś elektrycznik? Kurczę. W głosie poźniej
Stanley just sat around twiddling his thumbs. Trying to input
Yep.
anything on the device was useless, since he could never possibly know that the combination was 2845.
Ale gdzie ja mam to stukać? Halo, pomocy.
2845.
A tam, dobra, sorry. Jak to było? Tu. Y,
Forgot, but it turns out that the panel's emergency override kicked in, and the door just opened all by itself. And Stanley got the hell
Awaryjny
along with the
wzór.
story.
Zastanę w
Well,
końcu
whoop
ruchu
de
dalej.
do.
Kurwa, samo się wkurzyło, no nieźle, nieźle. Dobra, nie zamierzacie, no nie idę tam. Nie teraz, tylko nie tutaj. Wow. W ogóle mam nadzieję, że wszystko dobrze się nagrywa. Loading, 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 loading. W ogóle mam nadzieję, że sobie czytacie te napisy, bo właśnie...
Descending deeper into the building, Stanley realized he felt a bit peculiar. It was a stirring of emotion in his chest, as though he felt more free to think for himself, to question the nature of his job. Why did he feel this now, when for years it had never occurred to him? This question would not go unanswered for long. Stanley walked straight ahead through the large door that read Mind Control Facility.
kontroli umysłu. A tam chyba tak, to tam mnie tu umierało po prostu. Bo mogę się skradać? Tam nie widziałem. Kotamy.
The lights rose on an enormous room packed with television screens. What horrible secret did this place hold? Stanley thought to himself. Did he have the strength to find out?
Tak, mam wystarczająco siły, żeby to odkryć. Leki kafelek, spokojnie, koronawirus.
Now the monitors jumped to life, their
Monitory.
true nature revealed. Each bore the number of an employee in the building, Stanley's co-workers. The lives of so many individuals reduced to images on a screen, and Stanley, one of them, eternally monitored in this place where freedom meant nothing.
Było tego. Na pewno by się jakiś easter egg tutaj znalazł.
This mind control facility, it was too horrible to believe. It couldn't be true. Had Stanley really been under someone's control all this time? Was this the only reason he was happy with his boring job? That his emotions had been manipulated to accept it blindly? No, he refused to believe it. He couldn't accept it. His own life in someone else's control? Never! It was unthinkable, wasn't it? Was it even possible? Had he truly spent his entire life utterly blind to the world? But here was the proof, the heart of the operation. Controls labeled with emotions, happy or sad or content. Walking, eating, working, all of it monitored and commanded from this very place. And as the cold reality of his past began to sink in, Stanley decided that this machinery would never again exert its terrible power over another human life. For he would dismantle the controls once and for all.
Ogólnie to jakby co, to ja sobie tak po prostu chodzę do fotelu. Mam kliknąć to, czy... Nie. Nie, tutaj mam coś kliknąć. Int control is available. Int.
And when at last he found the source of the room's power, he knew it was his duty, his obligation, to put an end to this horrible place and to everything it stood for.
O. No i co się stało?
Blackness and a rising chill of uncertainty. Was it over? Yes. He had won. He had defeated the machine, unshackled himself from someone else's command. Freedom was mere moments away. And yet, even as the immense door slowly opened, Stanley reflected on how many puzzles still lay unsolved. Where had his co-workers gone? How had he been freed from the machine's grasp? What other mysteries did this strange building hold? But as sunlight streamed into the chamber, he realized none of this mattered to him, for it was not knowledge or even power that he had been seeking, but happiness. Perhaps his goal had not been to understand, but to let go. No longer would anyone tell him where to go, what to do, or how to feel. Whatever life he lives, it will be his. And that was all he needed to know. It was perhaps the only thing worth knowing. Stanley stepped through the open door.
Nie, nie wyjdę. Mogę coś zrobić jeszcze? Dobra, chyba nie, chyba muszę być.
Stanley felt the cool breeze upon his skin, the feeling of liberation, the immense possibility of the new path before him. This was exactly the way, right now, that things were meant to happen. And Stanley was happy.
No. No cóż. No to zaczynamy od nowa. Rejestracja. Poczekajcie, tutaj coś nie robić. Nic tu nie ma? Chyba nie.
All of his co-workers were gone.
Wiecie co, bo
What could it
tutaj
mean?
chyba dało się jakoś
Stanley
skoczyć
decided
przez
to go
okno.
to the meeting room. Perhaps he had simply missed a memo. No matter how hard Stanley looked.
O, widzę. Mi się wyszło w przypadek. Halo, bro. A zepsułem grę. To
Couldn't
udało.
find a trace of his co-workers.
Sorry. Podłączam te komputery, może dostanę jakieś osiągnięcie w stylu. Co to jest? Punkt. Nie mogę kliknąć. Nie wiem, nie dalej.
When Stanley came to a set of two open doors,
Pójdę
he
może
entered the
tutaj
door on his
jeszcze.
left.
Kurczę, były te drzwi. Poszukam takich ciemnych drzwi.
Yet there was not a single person here either.
Dobra.
Feeling a wave of disbelief, Stanley decided to go up to his boss's office, hoping he might find an answer there. Stanley stepped into the broom closet, but there was nothing here, so he turned around and got back on track. There was nothing here. No choice to make, no path to follow, just an empty broom closet. No reason to still be here.
A ja no to się jest. Zamiast u
It
góry.
was baffling that Stanley was still just sitting in the broom closet. He wasn't even doing anything. At least if there was something to interact with, he'd be justified in some way. As it is, he's literally just standing there doing sweet FA.
Ciekawe jest, nie?
Are you really still in the broom closet? Standing around doing nothing? Why? Please offer me some explanation here. I'm genuinely confused.
Bo mogę, dlatego się nie mogę tam powiedzieć. Ej,
You do realize there's no choice or anything in here, right? If I'd said Stanley walked past the broom closet, at least you would have had a reason for exploring it to find out. But it didn't even occur to me because literally this closet is of absolutely no significance to the story whatsoever. I never would have thought to mention it. Maybe to you this is somehow its own branching path. Maybe when you go talk about this with your friends you'll say, "Oh, did you get the broom closet ending? The broom closet ending was my favourite." I hope your friends find this concerning.
mieliście tam było XD.
Stanley was fat and ugly and really, really stupid. He probably only got the job because of a family connection. That's how stupid he is. That or with drug money. Also, Stanley is addicted to drugs and hookers. Well, I've come to a very definite conclusion about what's going on right now. You're
A
dead.
żyje.
You got to this broom closet,
Oj, to
explored it a bit,
spokojnie,
and
no.
were just about to leave because there's nothing here, when a physical malady of some sort shut down your central nervous system and you collapsed on the keyboard. Well, in a situation like this, the responsible thing is to alert someone nearby so as to ensure that your body is taken care of before it begins to decompose. Hello? Anyone who happens to be nearby? The person at this computer is dead. He or she has fallen prey to any number of your countless human physiological vulnerabilities. It's indicative of the long-term sustainability of your species. Please remove their corpse from the area and instruct another human to take their place at the computer, making sure they understand basic first-person video game mechanics and filling them in on the history of narrative tropes in video gaming, so that the irony and insightful commentary of this game is not lost on them. All right, when you've done that, just step out into the hallway.
Dobra, teraz już chyba wróciliśmy nic.
Ah, second player. It's good to have you on board. I guarantee you can't do any worse than the person who came before you. You too? Unbelievable. I'm at the mercy of an entire species of invalids. Perhaps there's a monkey nearby you can hand the controls to. A fish? Fungus? Look, you can hammer out the details. I'm not particularly picky. I'll just be waiting for when you're ready to pick up the story again.
Dobra, i w tym momencie już chyba naprawdę nic tutaj więcej nie da zrobić. Idę dalej.
Coming to a staircase, Stanley walked upstairs to his boss's office.
A ja poszedłem sobie na dół. No i co on mi zrobi?
But Stanley just couldn't do it. He considered the possibility of facing his boss, admitting he had left his post during work hours. He might be fired for that. And in such a competitive economy, why had he taken that risk? All because he believed everyone had vanished? His boss would think he was crazy. And then something occurred to Stanley. Maybe, he thought to himself, maybe I am crazy. All of my co-workers blinking mysteriously out of existence in a single moment for no reason at all? None of it made any logical sense. And as Stanley pondered this, he began to make other strange observations. For example, why couldn't he see his feet when he looked down? Why did doors close automatically behind him wherever he went? And for that matter, these rooms were starting to look pretty familiar. Were they simply repeating? No, Stanley said to himself, this is all too strange. This can't be real. And at last, he came to the conclusion that had been on the tip of his tongue. He just hadn't found the words for it. I'm dreaming, he yelled. This is all a dream. Oh, what a relief Stanley felt to have finally found an answer, an explanation. His co-workers weren't actually gone. He wasn't going to lose his job. He wasn't crazy after all. And he thought to himself, I suppose I'll wake up soon. I'll have to go back to my boring real-life job pushing buttons. I may as well enjoy this while I'm still lucid. So he imagined himself flying and began to gently float above the ground. Then he imagined himself soaring through space on a magical starfield, and it too appeared. It was so much fun, and Stanley marveled that he had still not woken up. How was he remaining so lucid? And then perhaps the strangest question of them all entered Stanley's head. One he was amazed he hadn't asked himself sooner. Why is there a voice in my head dictating everything that I'm doing
Bo
and
to się
thinking?
robi powoli psychodelicznie,
Now the
jak
voice was
zaczynam bać.
describing itself being considered by Stanley, who found it particularly strange. I'm dreaming about a voice describing me, thinking about how it's describing my thoughts, he thought. And while he thought it all very odd and wondered if this voice spoke to all people in their dreams, the truth was that, of course, this was not a dream. How could it be? Was Stanley simply deceiving himself, believing that if he's asleep, he doesn't have to take responsibility for himself? Stanley is as awake right now as he's ever been in his life. Now, hearing the voice speak these words was quite a shock to Stanley. After all, he knew for certain, beyond a doubt, that this was in fact a dream. Did the voice not see him float and make the magical stars just a moment ago? How else would the voice explain all that? This voice was a part of himself too. Surely, if he could just... He would prove it. He would prove that he was in control, that this was a dream. So he closed his eyes gently, and he invited himself to wake up. He felt the cool weight of the blanket on his skin, the press of the mattress on his back, the fresh air of a world outside this one. Let me wake up, he thought to himself. I'm through with this dream. I wish it to be over. Let me go back to my job. Let me continue pushing the buttons. Please, it's all I want. I want my apartment and my wife and my job. All I want is my life exactly the way it's always been. My life is normal. I am normal. Everything will be fine. I am okay.
Okej, ale i tak się nie obudził.
Stanley began screaming. Please, someone, wake me up. My name is Stanley. I have a boss. I have an office. I am real. Please, just someone tell me I am real. I must be real. I must be. Can anyone hear my voice? Who am I? Who am I? And everything went black.
I chwilę.
This is the story of a woman named Mariella. Mariella woke up on a day like any other. She arose, got dressed, gathered her belongings, and walked to her place of work. But on this particular day, her walk was interrupted by the body of a man who had stumbled through town talking and screaming to himself, and then collapsed dead on the sidewalk. And although she would soon turn to go call for an ambulance, for just a few brief moments, she considered the strange man. He was obviously crazy. This much she knew. Everyone knows what crazy people look like. And in that moment, she thought to herself how lucky she was to be normal. I am sane. I am in control of my mind. I know what is real and what isn't. It was comforting to think this, and in a certain way, seeing this man made her feel better. But then she remembered the meeting she had scheduled for that day. The very important people whose impressions of her would affect her career, and by extension, the rest of her life. She had no time for this. So it was only a moment that she stood there, staring down at the body. And then she turned and ran.
Czyli ogólnie nie opłaca się schodzić na ogół, tyle wiem. Albo wiecie co? Chyba wejdę tam
All
jeszcze
of his
raz,
co-workers were
tylko
gone.
że ja
What could it
wcześniej
mean?
stałem po prostu w
Stanley
miejscu.
decided to go to the meeting room.
A
Perhaps he had
teraz
simply missed a
może
memo.
spróbuję,
No matter how hard Stanley looked, he couldn't find a trace
może
of his
spróbuję,
co-workers.
ale to może.
At first, Stanley assumed he'd broken the map until he heard this narration and realized it was part of the game's design all along. He then praised the game for its insightful and witty commentary into the nature of video game structure and its examination of structural narrative tropes. So, now that you're here, what do you think? Isn't this a fun and unique place to be? Why don't we take a minute just to drink it all in? Okay, I'm over it now. What do you think? Are you sick of this gag yet? Then in that case, we'll continue. But now, here comes the real question. What do you think would have happened if you had told me that you wanted this to stop? Do you think it would have been particularly different? Would I have taken the same idea but rephrased it superficially to fit that answer? Perhaps you never would even have thought of it if I hadn't brought up the issue in the first place. Oh, now think about it. Will it be worth it for you to restart and then come back here just to do the other option? Clearly, this whole gag takes some time. What if the other option is even longer? How long will you spend in total just to have heard all the narration? Oh, and this is rich. Perhaps you've just played the other option, and now you've come to see what happens in this one. So, what do you think? Which choice was the better one? Imagine if you had selected continue on your first playthrough, how tantalizing it would be not knowing what happens when you pick the other option. Indeed, you are one of the lucky ones. Though if the other option is really miserable to listen to, then perhaps you're not. In fact, I'm just going to say that no one who's listening to this is lucky. Well now, I've built up the other options so much that I'm going to stop talking and leave you to your decision whether to come back here, continue with the game, or just sit in this spot forever and ever. Cheers.
No cóż, a więc rozpocznij grę ponownie. No i teraz, tak jak tutaj narrator powiedział, bardzo słusznie, wrócimy tam sprawdzić, coś stanie się dobieżone
Someone was
numer
following Stanley.
2.
He was sure of it. If he checked over his shoulder now, he would surely catch them. It was only a matter of time.
Nieosiągalny. No i wciąż nieosiągalny. Taki za mnie świetny gracz. A, nie spadło mi.
At first, Stanley
No
assumed
dobra,
he'd
no to
broken the
teraz
map until he
mamy...
heard this narration and realized it was part of the game's design all along. He then praised the game for its insightful and witty
No dobra, no
commentary
teraz
into the
mamy
nature of
po
video game
prostu ten
structure
dialog, który
and its
mieliśmy
examination of
nic ciekawego.
structural narrative tropes.
W ogóle mam
So,
nadzieję, że
now
mnie
that you're here, what do you
ten dialog
think?
bardzo nie
Isn't this a
zagłusza.
fun and unique
I że
place
na
to
odwrót,
be?
ja go jakoś
Why
tam
don't we take a
bardzo
minute just to drink it all
że nie
in?
jest tak zaścigu o tym.
Okay, I'm
Ale
over it
raczej nie
now.
jest
What do
zaścigu.
you think? Are you sick of this
Mam
gag
taką nadzieję.
yet?
Yes.
Well, I don't know how to say this politely, but you could literally just hit escape and restart the game any old time you want, like right now. You could have done it just then. Now would also be an appropriate time to quit. Any of these points and so many, many more, all of them are appropriate. I'm enjoying what seems to be an internal conflict going on where you are literally unable to act on your own desires to restart the game. So, just to push the envelope, I'm going to try and make this as miserable as possible and see how long you can maintain. There once was a man named Stanley, who people considered so manly. but the truth must be told, he was not very old and was quite particularly gangly. What Stanley liked most was buttons. He pushed them like some kind of glutton. He did it all day in a meaningful way, but his brain had long ceased to function. Which is why he is in this parable and lives an existence quite terrible. And if you are not strong and keep playing along, you too will become quite unbearable. Yes. You too will become quite unbearable.
Bardzo miła pioseneczka, mu powiem. Mam nawet na imprezę, kurczę, dziękuję. Tańczymy. Dobra, chyba nigdy więcej już nie będzie, więc cóż. W sumie, no to myślę sobie, że ten odcinek ile już trwa? No, trwa już więcej niż myślałam. Dlatego myślę, że można to już zakończyć. Więc do widzenia. Cześć i pa pa.